Imagine a land cradled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, a place where history itself was born. Here, amidst the sun-scorched plains and reed-filled marshes, cities rose like mountains from the earth. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, they all had their time in the sun. And then came another people, a hard people, from the north. They took their name from their city, Ashur, and from their city they took their god, also named Ashur. These were the Assyrians. Their story didn't begin with a thunderclap, but with the slow, patient work of merchants and farmers. They were traders, building wealth one caravan at a time. Their beginnings were humble, overshadowed by mightier neighbors. They were a small kingdom, a city-state really, clinging to the upper Tigris. How does a small kingdom become a mighty empire? For Assyria, the answer was written in iron. They emerged into a new age, the Iron Age, and they embraced its defining metal with a terrifying ferocity. Iron was cheaper and more plentiful than bronze. It meant you could equip vast armies. Spears, swords, helmets, armor, all made of this dark, strong metal. The Assyrians became masters of ironworking. Their armies were not just larger, they were better equipped than any who had come before. Their kings were not distant divine figures. They were warrior kings, leading their armies from the front. They presented themselves as the chosen instruments of the god Ashur. Their strategy was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Their propaganda was carved into the very walls of their palaces. Stone reliefs showed Assyrian armies marching, cities burning, and captives being flayed alive. They practiced mass deportation. They would uproot entire populations, tens, even hundreds of thousands of people, and march them across the empire to new lands. For the ordinary Assyrian, life was a cycle of hard work, dictated by the seasons and the demands of the state. Most were farmers, tending fields of barley and wheat along the rivers and canals. Religion permeated every aspect of Assyrian society. They worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, Adad, the god of storms, Shamash, the sun god and judge. But above them all stood Ashur. Scribes were the backbone of this system. From a young age, they were trained in the difficult art of cuneiform writing, pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay. They recorded everything: tax revenues, military supplies, legal contracts, royal correspondence, astronomical observations. These clay tablets were baked for permanence, creating an incredible archive of the empire. Art and architecture were expressions of power and piety. Inside these palaces, the walls were lined with magnificent stone reliefs. These weren't just decorations. They were narrative storyboards depicting the king's great deeds. The Assyrians built on a grand scale. Their cities were fortified with massive walls, their temples reached for the heavens, and their palaces were monuments to royal glory. Some kings are born to rule. Ashur-nasirpal II was born to conquer. He ascended to the throne in 883 BC and unleashed a storm of violence that redefined the very nature of the Assyrian Empire. His military campaigns were relentless, a whirlwind of destruction that swept across the Near East. He marched his armies west to the Mediterranean, north into the mountains of Anatolia, and south towards Babylonia. His royal inscriptions, carved in stone for all to see, are chilling catalogues of his conquests. He revels in his own brutality, boasting of the pillars of skulls he erected and the officials he flayed alive. "I am Ashur-nasirpal," he declared, "the celebrated king, the merciless judge." He wanted his enemies to know that resistance was futile. But he was more than just a brute. He was a master builder. He decided to move his capital from the ancient city of Ashur to a new, magnificent city, Nimrud. He called it Kalhu. This palace was a wonder of the age, its gates guarded by colossal winged bulls with human heads, the lamassu, protective spirits carved from single blocks of stone. To celebrate the completion of his new capital, Ashur-nasirpal II threw a party that has gone down in history. He invited the entire population of the city, along with dignitaries from across his new empire. The guest list numbered almost 70,000 people. For 10 days they feasted on a staggering amount of food and drink. It was the ultimate display of wealth and power. This was the king who feared nothing, a man who built a glorious city on a foundation of terror. Centuries after Ashur-Nisirpal II came another great king, but a very different kind of man. This was Ashurbanipal, who reigned from 668 to around 627 BC. He was a fierce warrior, a ruthless conqueror who campaigned in Egypt and crushed a rebellion led by his own brother in Babylon. His reliefs show him in the thick of battle, a heroic figure slaying his enemies. Yet there was another side to him, a side utterly unique among the warrior kings of Assyria. Ashurbanipal was a scholar. He was a man who could read and write, and he didn't just read, he loved knowledge. He was passionate about the history, literature, and science of Mesopotamia. He saw himself not just as a conqueror of lands, but as a preserver of culture. Ashurbanipal created the world's first truly systematic library. He sent his scribes to every corner of the empire, to old temples and dusty archives, with orders to collect and copy every text they could find. They gathered works on history, mythology, magic, medicine, astronomy, and literature. They brought back tens of thousands of clay tablets. In this great library, he housed the treasures of Mesopotamian thought. The most famous text to be preserved there was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, containing an account of a great flood that, interestingly, predates the story of Noah. Without Ashurbanipal's library, these stories and so much of what we know about the ancient Near East would have vanished into the dust. He was the empire's final brilliant flame, but he could not secure the future. The Assyrian army was the most advanced and honestly the most terrifying fighting force of its time. It was a professional standing army, which was a pretty revolutionary concept back then. The infantry formed the core, with spearmen fighting in disciplined phalanxes and archers raining death from a distance. Most importantly, though, they had chariots. The Assyrian chariot was the ancient world's equivalent of a tank. Siege warfare was their absolute speciality. They developed a whole arsenal of siege engines. There were colossal wooden towers on wheels, battering rams with iron-tipped heads, and sappers who would tunnel underneath the walls to collapse them from below. No city felt safe. The sight of the Assyrian siege camp appearing outside your walls was, honestly, the beginning of a nightmare from which there was often no waking. This war machine brought immense wealth back to the heartland of the empire. Under kings like Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, Nineveh became the largest city in the world. Sennacherib constructed the palace without rival, a building of breathtaking size and opulence, its halls decorated with miles of intricate stone carvings celebrating his triumphs. Perhaps the most famous feature were the legendary hanging gardens. Sennacherib built a complex system of aqueducts and canals, some stretching over 50 kilometers, using the Archimedes screw to create terraced gardens that simulated a mountain landscape. Nineveh was the ultimate expression of Assyrian power, a city of unparalleled splendor, built by conquest and sustained by the tribute of a subjugated world. It was, they thought, a city that would last forever. The history of Assyria is, honestly, a history of its great sieges. One of the most famous was the siege of Lachish in 701 BC, during the reign of King Sennacherib. Sennacherib's army descended upon it with overwhelming force. The reliefs show the climax of the battle in brutal detail. Assyrian soldiers, protected by huge shields, scale the walls on ladders. The city falls. We see the city's leaders being brought before Sennacherib, who sits on an ornate throne. Some are executed, flayed alive. The rest of the population is marched away into exile, their possessions loaded onto carts. The Lachish reliefs are a masterpiece of military narrative, a stark and powerful testament to the fate of those who defied Assyria. After Lachish, Sennacherib marched on Jerusalem. This was the ultimate prize. The Bible tells the story of King Hezekiah preparing the city's defenses, famously building a tunnel to secure its water supply. Sennacherib's own account boasts that he shut Hezekiah up like a caged bird, but something strange happened. For reasons that are still debated by historians, the Assyrians did not take the city. Whatever the cause, Jerusalem was spared, a rare moment of failure for the unstoppable army. Another pivotal conquest was the destruction of Babylon. For centuries, the ancient city of Babylon had been a rebellious thorn in Assyria's side. Sennacherib's own father had been killed there. After a revolt led by a Babylonian king, Sennacherib's patience snapped. In 689 BC, he did the unthinkable. He didn't just conquer Babylon. He utterly destroyed it. This act shocked the ancient world and created deep resentment that would contribute to Assyria's eventual downfall. No empire lasts forever. For Assyria, the end came with stunning speed. At its height under Ashurbanipal, the empire stretched from Egypt to Iran. It really seemed invincible. But the very things that made it strong also contained the seeds of its destruction. The constant warfare was a terrible drain on its manpower and resources. The empire was just too big to control effectively. That moment came after the death of Ashurbanipal around 627 BC. His death was followed by a series of weak rulers and bitter civil wars between his sons and generals. As the Assyrians fought amongst themselves, the empire began to bleed power. The central authority in Nineveh weakened, and the provinces began to break away. Egypt had already regained its independence, but the greatest threat was rising in the south, in the land of Babylonia. A Chaldean leader named Nabopolassar seized the throne of Babylon and began a war of liberation. To the east, in the mountains of Iran, a new power was emerging, the Medes. The Medes, under their king Cyaxares, forged an alliance with Nabopolassar's Babylonians. It was a coalition of the empire's oldest and most bitter enemies. For the first time, Assyria faced a coordinated attack from two powerful fronts. The hunter had become the hunted. In 614 BC, they captured and sacked the ancient religious capital of Ashur. The symbolic blow was immense. Then, in 612 BC, they laid siege to the jewel of the empire, the exceeding great city of Nineveh. After a 3-month siege, the mighty walls were breached. What followed was a cataclysm of destruction. The great empire, which had terrorized the world for 3 centuries, collapsed into blood and ruin. The fall of Nineveh in 612 BC was so absolute, so total, that the Assyrian Empire seemed to just vanish from history. Its great cities were reduced to mounds of earth, their names forgotten. For 2,000 years, the story of Assyria was known only through the words of its enemies, in the pages of the Bible and the accounts of Greek historians. It was a memory of a cruel and terrible power that had been justly swept away. In the mid-19th century, a new breed of explorer and archaeologist, men like Austin Henry Layard and Paul-Émile Botta, came to Mesopotamia. They began to dig into the mysterious mounds that dotted the landscape near the modern city of Mosul. What they found was astonishing. They unearthed the ruins of the great Assyrian palaces at Nimrud, Khorsabad, and Nineveh. They uncovered the colossal Lamassu guardians, the miles of stone reliefs, and most importantly, the tens of thousands of clay tablets from Ashurbanipal's library. Assyria was speaking again, in its own voice. The rediscovery of Assyria changed our understanding of the ancient world. The tablets from the library opened up a lost world of literature, science, and history. The art and architecture revealed a sophisticated and powerful culture. The Assyrians were not just the brutal thugs of the Old Testament. They were brilliant administrators, engineers, and astronomers who created systems that would be copied by later empires. And the story is not over. The Assyrian people did not disappear. They are still here, a Christian minority in their ancient homeland of northern Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. They still speak a modern form of the Aramaic language that was once the lingua franca of their empire. They have survived centuries of persecution and violence, clinging to their unique identity and heritage. Their ancient cities may be ruins, but their spirit endures. The story of the Assyrian Empire is a powerful reminder of the rise and fall of great powers, a tale of glory, terror, and survival. It is an echo in the dust that, if you listen carefully, you can still hear today.